Welcome to A&N In Depth. This thought-provoking podcast provides valuable insights from credible scholars and leaders within the Adventist community to help you understand the Seventh-day Adventist Church, its structures, its practices, its beliefs, and anything else related to the church, really. Whether you are a lifelong Adventist or a curious listener, stick around. I'm your host, Sam Nevis, and this is A&N In Depth. Today, we have Heather Dawn Small with us. Heather, welcome to A&N In Depth.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You have been the leader of women's ministries for the Seventh-day Adventist Church for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And this meant you've traveled the globe and you've met with at least tens of thousands of women.
Yes.
Have you seen a progression of the issues that women have to deal with over the last however many years you've been doing this?
Okay, so I've been leader for 17 years now, and I was here 3 years before that.
So it's 2 decades.
Yes.
Right? A lot has changed in the last 20 years.
A lot has changed. What I've seen where women's issues are concerned, which has been heartening to me, is that we're focusing more on the issues. When I first came to the GC in 2001, it was a struggle to get every division to focus on the issues that affect women. It took some years. There were divisions that said, we don't have abuse in our division. Poverty doesn't apply to us. But through the years, everyone realizes that no, all these issues that we focus on are in every place in the world. It doesn't matter what the country is. And yes, it applies to us as a church. So that's one change I've seen. I don't have statistics saying if these issues have become worse, but I do know because we're paying more attention to it, more women are talking about it.
I had a chat with Nilde recently.
Yes.
And she pointed out you have 3 emphases, and I'm trying to remember. I know the last one is outreach, the middle
Nurture.
one is empowerment, and the first one is nurture.
Nurture, empower, outreach, yes.
That's right. So is this something recent? Have you always had these 3, or is this did this emerge from your conversations with women all around the world and through the advisories? We'll explain what that is in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a result of that conversation? Or
I wish I could say it were. The conversations helped us to affirm that this was the way we should move. We still have a very long mission statement. Who's remembering what our mission statement is? I don't. I've never memorized it. But I was in South Pacific Division number of years ago, I'd say about 2005, 6, and that was their emphasis, nurture, empower, and outreach, and they divided up the mission statement between these 3 areas. And I thought that was amazing. It was wonderful. I thought, oh, wow, when somebody asks you, what is women's ministries about? We can say, well, we're about nurturing women, empowering women through training, and setting them out to go and do outreach. And so we adapted that from South Pacific Division, and it became a world emphasis for us. So everywhere in the world, women talk about nurture, empower, and outreach.
That's excellent. South Pacific, for those that are listening and are not familiar with the structure of the Adventist Church, this is Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and other islands.
Islands around, yeah.
Around that side of the world. I'm going there soon. It's a long way.
Yes, it is.
I've been there before, and you remember the trip.
Yes, you do. It is a long trip.
Sometimes,
if you go New Zealand and you're crossing the timeline, it becomes even confusing.
Wow. Sometimes you can miss a whole day.
Yes, you can. That timeline does it.
Yeah. We often remember the place where we travel, but to New Zealand or to Australia, you actually remember the trip itself becomes an event.
Yes, it does, just because of the length of time it takes to get there. And also when you go to the islands, the women that you relate to. And when I think of South Pacific, I think of Vanuatu. That sticks in my mind because that's the sinking island. That's the island in that part of the world that the global warming is literally the water's rising and the island is disappearing. And many people have moved from that island. And that's the island where I found women who did not have their own Bibles, because in the culture, the man had the Bible. And so we bought Bibles for the women after consulting with the leadership there. So I'll never forget. I think South Pacific, I think Vanuatu immediately.
That is amazing. Well, let's pull that thread of culture there. I love it. I was going in a different direction, but
I'm sorry.
Now this is it.
Okay.
How do you find, because our own culture in the last 100 years has been struggling with the roles that women play in our families and in the workplace and in society in general. Yeah. We've seen tremendous change in the last 100 years.
Yes.
Perhaps more than the previous few thousand years.
Definitely.
We're adapting to learn how to work together in the same office, men and women in the same environment. And women are trying to adapt to having a job and coming home to another job, and
that's a constant challenge.
How to negotiate with their husbands on how to negotiate altogether, right? Because if ever, the one of the consequences of freedom is negotiation. When you have no freedom, there's no negotiation.
That's right.
Right. But when there is freedom, there must be negotiation.
Yes.
And this is something that I have found in my mentorship to the women that I mentor. Most of my time is helping them negotiate what they want. Because, okay, you want this. Well, then negotiate it.
Yeah.
That's,
if possible.
If possible, right? If it's not possible, what can we do to facilitate an environment where negotiation is possible?
Sometimes in some relations like you, I find myself doing too much counseling. And I say too much because sometimes it could be overwhelming. And there are situations where it is definitely not possible, where women are trapped in a relationship where the husband, sadly, is not on the same in the same room with them when it comes to spiritual things. So he's outside that room in a more secular mindset, and she's in that spiritual atmosphere. Okay, so then it really becomes an impossible situation because he's not coming at all. He doesn't see the need, the importance. Then that to her becomes a thing of intense prayer. And I always say to women, get a prayer circle. Have a group of women who are supporting you in prayer. Unless, of course, there's abuse involved in the relationship, and then my counsel goes a little differently. But many times, I'm not saying most times, but many times it's possible to, maybe with counseling, and that's another issue. So many men don't agree with counseling. They don't want to hear about a counselor.
In my experience, they agree with it as long as it's for other people.
Thank you very much. As long as it's for other people.
Oh, counseling is very helpful. Very helpful.
Yes.
So why don't you do it? Because I don't need it.
That's right. That's right. Or it's our private business. I don't want it discussed outside of the home. And then I tell women, you go and get your therapy done. You get what you need. Not only you spiritually, but you need the skills, you need the mindset to deal with this situation until, God willing, it changes. And if it never changes, then how am I going to live with this for the rest of my life? So it is a challenge for women, the whole issue of leadership. And that's one of our challenges in women's ministries. We have 6 challenge issues that we deal with. And one of them is lack of education, mentoring, and leadership opportunities. You know, I know as a World Church, we've spent a lot of time dealing with the ordination issue. And that's not an issue that we deal with. We deal with leadership. Women are qualified in so many areas to be leaders in the church, to be leaders in community. And education helps us, experience helps us. We are multitaskers, you know, and that's why I think so many times where you find women in leadership in the church, they are given multiple departments or multiple tasks because, which I don't always think is fair, but because we are able to do so many things at the same time and get them done. And so, yeah, it is difficult. And like I said, our emphasis is on educating our women to be leaders from the church level, a departmental leader, to the conference level, sitting on a conference executive committee, you know, heading departments, even being a secretary or treasurer of a division. Women are more than capable.
Absolutely. I have... We read constantly that we need more women being represented within our representative body, usually a general conference session. we look at photos of 3,000 delegates.
Yes.
And if you remove the spouses and you just take the delegates themselves, there is a minority of women.
Sad minority, yes.
Yeah, but that's, to me, and maybe you agree or not, so tell me what you think. To me, I see that as a symptom that in the local churches, we did not involve women in leadership earlier on. Because the truth is, I don't know your story, Heather Dawn, but I don't think we get a Heather Dawn without somebody involving you back in the day in the local church, in a local conference, in exposing you to leadership. Yes. We don't get a leader that has not been given the chance to teach and to help and to guide and to lead.
Yes.
My leadership started when I was in Pathfinders at 10 years old. At 11, I became captain of my unit, which now meant that I had to lead people, from that. And people don't just want to follow you. Mm-hmm. They need to have a reason for it.
Yes,
and everything else that comes in leadership. But the consequence of that is that I acquired more competence in this area, and then I was given more opportunities, and therefore more competence, and it becomes this growth that happens. How do we involve women in positions of leadership in local churches so they can get started sooner?
Well, women hold the traditional roles in leadership in the local churches and all the way up. Women are involved in children's Sabbath school. That's just a traditional post for us. Women are involved in community services. That may be the leader for that department. And sometimes you see women as Pathfinder leaders, because I wish we had more men, and I wish it was co-leadership, because I think we need both.
Yes.
But that's about it, the traditional posts. But through the past, I would say 10 years, I have seen a shift in different places, not generally, but in different places, even in the non-traditional leadership areas of the world. I'm seeing women in positions of leadership that they normally wouldn't hold, whether it was a treasurer of a field office or a youth department director, areas that we didn't typically find ourselves leading in. And then, of course, you have more women as elders in churches. Like you, I grew up in a system where I was encouraged in leadership. We had a youth church, or what I should say junior church, because it was primary, juniors, and early teens. And I remember the age of 13, and our church, our children's church, was run almost like the senior church was, because they were trying to get us accustomed and adapted. There were deacons and deaconesses and elders.
Where was this?
This is in Trinidad and Tobago. And it was amazing. But I remember being head deaconess at the age of 13, and we had our little uniforms, blue skirts, white shirts, and we had our little pins on. And in the senior church, there was that structure also. And then we moved in. I was never an elder, unfortunately, because that wasn't considered a female thing at that time. Mm-hmm. However, as I grew up in the church, I found myself as an assistant AY leader. And just being nurtured in those positions. It took a while, and I still see that it's not the rule, it's the exception. Mm. And that's why I really think women have a large role to play in identifying other women leaders. We have a leadership certification program in our department. It's 3 levels. And because we want to educate every women who have never finished high school, women who have never been to college, can do this 3-level program year after year, over 3 years, get a certificate even from Andrews. They can get an Andrews University continuing education certificate. Mm. You know what that does to a woman who never finished school? And here she has an Andrews certificate on her wall.
Right.
But in addition to that, we created a 4th level. And the 4th level is shorter than any other level. It's about 8 seminars. This is specifically for our leaders to identify young women and any woman in the church who you see has the potential of leadership. Train her. Because you see, nobody else is going to do it for us. Very few. I shouldn't say that, because it was men who put me in those positions when I was young. But it is us women who've got to make that move and say, okay, no, we're going to train our young women. We're going to talk to our elders and our pastors and say, look, we have someone here who could serve in this position. But if we don't do anything, then things don't change as fast as they should, considering how slow it's been.
I like that very much, because it's actually very difficult for a pastor or an elder or a man in leadership to encourage and mentor young women.
That's right.
Right? I remember.
I don't think it should happen, really.
You see? It's actually very difficult.
Yes.
I will tell you a short story. I was in England as a pastor, and there was this shy 16-year-old British girl. And we took the potential leaders for the teens. We had about 90 teens. This was a large church.
Okay.
So we organized an event, and the whole event was just observing in tables who were the natural leaders, right? That naturally,
Excellent.
and we picked them and took them to a retreat to help them become the leaders
Perfect.
of the teens, right? So as part of that, this girl came to the retreat, and I was observing her, and I saw that she was very quiet, very shy, very quiet, but she got things done, and she had that potential for leadership.
Yes.
So I asked her to organize the first game of this series. Friday nights we had these games. They were organized into groups, and they had games. So I'll give you a little bit of the philosophy why we did that. The problem with large churches is inclusivity.
Oh, yes.
So there are cliques, and those cliques are holy, and it's difficult to get into the cliques. And we created inclusivity by building an exclusive system. If you are not part of a team, you don't belong. Okay, so that was the first step. But then we trained the leaders to open their eyes to those that were not part of a team and invite them to be part of their team.
Yes.
And on Sabbath morning, we would look and say, this 13-year-old here is not part of any team. We would come to one of these natural leaders and say, we think you should invite them to your team. And then now this 15-year-old comes to the 13-year-old and says, I would like you to be part of my team. And that did wonders, because now they belonged to something.
Yes.
So I asked this girl, her name is Sophie. Hey, Sophie, you organized the first one. Let me know what you need, but this is what I expect. And I gave her a good briefing of what to expect. And it was beautiful. And I thought, this is brilliant, fantastic. She heard that I had people that I mentored, and she then came to me and said, I would like you to mentor me. I thought, I need to pray and think about this. Okay, so I thought and prayed and said, okay, let's do it. I had not anticipated how difficult this would be. Because if you're going to mentor someone, they need to be part of your life.
That's right.
Right? So eventually my wife had the idea, and we talked together, and Sophie started to be like a babysitter for our youngest. Miles was a baby at the time. And that allowed her to be at home and watch, our home relationships and eat with us. And that part of the mentorship was golden. But what do I do with other situations? It's very hard.
It is.
How do I, as a pastor, spend time in public even? It's not the problem. I would never, drive her anywhere. That's not the point. The point is we're in church, and I'm talking to her more than any other team.
That's right.
That becomes inappropriate very quickly. And eventually Sophie thrived in her career. She started working in a shop and said, okay, so you're stacking shelves. It's just the lowest possible thing. Yes. Be the best shelf stacker.
Yes.
Do it with great competence. In 6 months, she was the assistant manager of that shop.
Wonderful.
And sooner she was the regional manager. By 21, she broke all records and moved to another company. And she was now managing 175 delivery people in this other company.
Okay.
All men.
So you were able to do something to a certain extent.
Yes.
And you're focusing on a challenge that we face. I'm a pastor's wife. My husband and I ministered as a team until I came to the general conference. And then I began world travel, and it became very difficult. But when we were in the Caribbean, we were team. My husband never counseled a female member of the church. And if they came to him now, well, then he didn't have much of a choice. Of course, it was the open door and all that sort of stuff. But once they asked him, Pastor, I need to meet with you, first thing he would say is, why don't you meet with my wife first? Because I think women need to and I'm going to put this out there, I think women need to pastor other women, to mentor other women, to
Yes.
nurture other women. And that's why I liked the co-leadership in a sense. I mean, it wasn't recognized by the conference. I wasn't even working with the conference, but we had a team ministry in the churches, and the women knew. And I would even tell them, when we came to a new church, and they would introduce the pastor and his wife. And when I got a chance to say something, I would say, I want to talk to my sisters. Ladies, I love you all. But when you have a problem and you need a shoulder to cry on these shoulders. Wow. And that was my little hint to them. He's not here for that. Don't compromise the pastor. Sadly, women today, many pastors' wives aren't able to do that. They've got little children. They've got jobs, which I had too, but my children were older. And so it becomes a challenge for the woman in the church. Who do I go to when I need help on an emotional issue? And one of the problems we've had, for example, with abuse, is because pastors, during a certain period of time, more and more now pastors are doing counseling in addition to what they've done to be a pastor. But too many women were misdirected by pastors who didn't have counseling experience, and who would say to them, well, be a better wife. Try and treat him nicer. Maybe it's your fault. And women are still dealing with the emotional effects of that kind of help.
I see.
And so women's ministries moved well-intentioned,
but unprepared, and benign advice sadly mistaken.
Yes.
So I in the counseling perspective, I usually had prayer warriors who were then elders who were women and could take care of those women. So there is a case for divisions, considering very seriously the role of women elders, and in the divisions where it is appropriate, where it is voted, women pastors too.
Yes.
So my experiences in Europe, and I've always had, within the region, women pastors, as well as women elders, and I find that to be very helpful, even as team ministry takes place.
Yes.
Let's go back to culture a little bit. We talked about our culture changing and having to adapt, but there are cultures that are so different from ours that adapting women's ministries.
Yes.
You mentioned Vanuatu, but there are other cultures that that the role of women is different. There are some matriarchal cultures. There are some other cultures. How do you navigate all of this?
You learn what the culture is about. Before I go to a new country, I always want to know, what is this culture about? Of course, I search the internet. I look at the history of that country. I look at news, news articles, because I want to have an idea of what's happening in this country. I look at statistics on abuse, on poverty, and so on, women's health. When I get into that culture, I talk with the leader. And I ask her, questions, a lot of questions, because I want to get an understanding of what I'm dealing with. So supposing I'm in a culture where women are really non-persons in that culture. They are there for one reason, in the relationship between husband and wife. Their main role is to have children, and to enlarge the whole family. But as a person, they're not really identified as a person. What do I say to them? Well, the first thing I want to talk to them about is self-esteem. What is your worth in God's eyes? Because if God created all of us, then we have to be worth something, that he would create women. And if we are worth something, what is that worth? And so I try to build up that part of them that has been trod down for so many years, for all their lives, for so many generations, and help them see. So among themselves, they encourage each other. Now, when they get back to the home relationship, they've got to slide back into that position. But that feeling of being downtrodden and of not being seen and of being nobody is slowly being removed, especially when they meet with other women. So you've got to adapt and adjust what you're doing with every culture. And sometimes I go to a culture where women have so much freedom and where there is, I want to say, equality in the home, but it's not balanced in the sense of, a woman now realizes, oh, these are my abilities, so I'm going to assert myself. And we do it in a very aggressive, a way that affects our husbands, and the children are watching what we are doing. And when I see that in a given culture, then I talk a little differently. I do always, everything I say is based on the Bible, but I do go back to what was the pre-sin model that marriage was supposed to be. That's what we're striving for. And if we're talking about equality, we're talking about partnership. Partnership means we work together, we discuss things, we compromise, and we don't lord it over. Well, now I know who I am, I'm going to deal with him. No. And so depending on where I am, you find you have to adjust. You've got to listen, you've got to ask, and you've got to research.
Yeah. More recently, in the last few years, when couples come to me and say, usually, because I've produced a lot of content online related to families.
Yes.
So whenever they want to get married, they come and ask for premarital counseling, or if they want to end the relationship, they also come. I don't know why exactly they come. We're going to bless them.
Help.
But yeah, it's like, okay, we decided it's over and we want you to know. And I say, well, if you come to me, it's because you don't think it's over and there is a chance.
That's right.
So I now don't talk to both of them anymore. I just talk to the guy. And it's worked well, because usually women they respond better. Even in scripture, God says to men to love their wives and give their life for us.
Love your wife.
Yeah. And to the woman, he said, okay, you're going to respond to that love. The command seems to be different, which to me means when there is a struggle in the home, it's the responsibility of the man to be vulnerable first, to love first, to be kind first. And 1 Corinthians 13 is a terrifying passage. Because if you're going to love seriously, that's impossible, by yourself to do it.
That's right.
But that's what, men are called to, and I'm sure women too. But in that passage, particularly men, does your wife know that you will give your life for her at any moment?
Yeah. Let's
start there. And usually by the time they invest in that connection, the marriage is saved.
Yeah.
So as you navigate all of these cultures and you navigate, these waters, it seems to me that a Bible-based spirituality it seems to be the only thing that will bring a healthy navigation of gender, let's say. I'm struggling for words, but
no, I understand.
The role of a man, the role of a woman, the responsibilities of a man, the responsibilities of a woman. When you take those first 3 chapters, especially the first 2 chapters of Genesis very seriously, and you see the 3rd chapter, that this coercive power dynamic from husband to wife is a direct result of sin. Because our men are made, their whole biology is made to be stronger. But that's a function of service, not a function of coercive power. And sin flips that on its head, and men start to put themselves first. And that's how you have the coercive power dynamics. And when you have the last 2 chapters of the Bible that describe the new earth and what it will be like, everything in between is a constant restoration until it's fully restored.
That's right.
And when you read that with women, their value, their worth, the way they see themselves and others in that light, but that should have an effect on men too.
Yes, it should.
Right? And you don't generally talk to men.
No.
What would you like men
somebody but what would?
That's my point. How do you, what was your dream that if you could talk to every man in the world, especially Adventist ones that believe in this first 2 chapters and the last 2, what would you like them to know so that the life with the women will be better?
So first thing I want to put in there is my dream is that men in the church, adult, mature men, would nurture the young men. That's my dream. Because women's ministries, we're nurturing empowering our young women. I don't see the same thing happening for our young men. And that to me is an area of great problems,
But it used
challenges.
to. At some point, it seems that it used to happen more naturally than now.
It used to, but we need to do it more intentionally. And I'm not seeing that, you know. Now, when it comes to what I would say to men, first thing I would say to them is love your wife. Show her the love. Don't tell me, oh, but she knows I love her. I'm sorry, no.
I told her that in our wedding day, if I change my mind, I'll remind.
You know, no.
No.
You know, because a woman, we're emotional creatures. And that's one of the reasons I believe, and this is just my own personal, based on all that I've seen, women have a more open heart to God and the Holy Spirit.
They're more sensitive to
We are,
yes.
much more. And it's because of that emotional side of us. And so understand the woman, not just your woman, but understand a woman. And realize that we need that touch, that little gift, those words, not once in a blue moon, but every day. Because we're going to tell you every day. And you may get sick of hearing it every day. But, okay, I've been married 44 years. First 10 years was absolutely a nightmare. After 5 years, I was ready, like, okay, I've had it.
I'm done.
Yeah. Both my husband and I felt so. This is it. Then we struggled on for 5 more years. But finally, we came to the conclusion that in marriage, we need to love each other. And that love is, I'm looking after you and you look after me. I nurture you and you nurture me. And as we turn the focus off, but he's not doing this for me and he's not doing that for me, to, oh no, this is what he needs. I'm going to do it for him. And he does the same thing for me. Then the past 34 years has just been so different because, you know, I know he loves me. Even if he didn't say it, I know it. Just by the little things that in the first 10 years, he was waiting for me to do stuff, you know, typical male thing, you know, you're the wife, you nurture, you do this. But now we both do it for each other. Even the little things. Sometimes he surprises me by a little something he'd do and I'd be like, wait, he thought of doing that? How amazing, you know? But we've got to get our men to think in that way because women naturally nurture. And we over nurture and then we get upset and angry because, but he's not doing anything to help me. When in truth, we need to sit down and talk about it. And of course, communication is one of the biggest problems in relationships.
I think it's very convenient for men. More recently, it's become even more convenient, even before marriage.
Yes.
Right. In the past, men had to do the difficult work. I call it the abyss. You know, you leave your mates and you cross the abyss to talk to her, but she's with her friends. And you're going to ask her out and you become fully vulnerable and she has all the power, yes. Right? She can say yes or no,
yeah.
But you need to be vulnerable in that right. sense. And I think that's where boys become men is when yes. they're willing to be strong enough to be vulnerable. And if she says no, only boys come back and blame her or say bad things about her.
Yes. Real
men don't do that. They then try, okay, I'm going to write her a letter. I'm going to find another way to demonstrate that I'm interested in,
yes.
and she's that I would like to know her better. So, but that's not where we've gone, Heather Dawn. What we have is you just swipe right for relationships. You know, it's become so easy for men nowadays that it's and I also hear this from women too, even married ones. He just comes home, puts his feet up, and doesn't see anything else. And everything's so convenient for the man. When in reality, that should not be the case. It should be when you talk about equally yoked, it also means equally burdened, equally focused, yes. equally, you know, and I'm sure that you help women to communicate that in the best way possible.
Yes. So
that, you know, there could be some more equality is the yes. right word. It's become a dirty word that means something now that it didn't used to, but I'm going to use in the original sense that they are equally valuable before God. And even though they may have right. different Amen. Roles, you know, so how in different cultures will react differently to yes. how this communication happens.
Yeah, and that brings me back to what I was saying. Now, I'm not saying the older men cannot change. With God's help, they can. But I'm focusing on the younger ones, the teens, the young adults. We tell our women, train your son to be a gentleman. Train him how to treat women. And this is something we've been doing for years now. You as a mother, this is your role. So my son growing up in my home always knew love. If it's a girlfriend, you treat her well, treat her with respect. When my son would bring a young woman home, and he went through a few girlfriends, but when he would bring one home, I would say to her in front of him, you let me know if he disrespects you in any way. You tell me, because I've taught him he mustn't do that. I said, and if in any situation you think you feel unsafe with him, you let me know. It's never happened because he has been trained how to treat a woman, never lay a hand on her, never shout at her, and so on. And that's something that we have been passing on to our women. But who's passing on to the young men the whole concept of love a woman? And not just in words, but in actions. Yes. And that's why everywhere I travel, I've been doing this now for a number of years. I speak at a big women's event, and there's a conference or union president and leadership there. And I take a minute or two to talk directly to them. And I say, we need something for our young men. We're dealing with the young women as well as the older ones, but we need something for our young men. I don't know how many have listened, but I keep talking.
It's easier to fix those problems earlier on rather than to fix it after marriage. That's definitely true.
That's why we need to do it now.
Yeah. I have noticed a dimension of overprotection, especially for young men. And tell me what you think about this. It seems that women are having children later. They're getting married later, and they're having children later in life. So instead of your early 20s, mid-20s, it's now,
late 20s, early 30s.
Early 30s, and some a bit later.
A bit later, true.
Which means that by the time the boy becomes, I'm talking especially about boys, because that's what you mentioned. By the time the boy is 15, she's no longer contemplating having other children, right? Which means that this is it. This is her son. And it's easier to be overprotective in that environment where, this is my precious boy. I'm going to do everything for him. That doesn't seem to be the upbringing you gave your son in the description you just gave. It's like, I'm not going to protect you.
And he was my only son. He is.
Yeah. See, so I'm going to call you out when you do something wrong.
Yeah.
The literature on this is pretty clear. If you have overprotective helicopter parents, you create narcissistic boys.
Yeah.
That are just focused on themselves. They're not interested in others. They find it more difficult to love in an unselfish way, to put themselves in danger for the sake of others.
Yeah.
Mentorship could be could change the future in a profound way for these boys.
Yes.
Especially in those crucial years. How do you see Pathfinders and other Adventist youth-related activities helping with that?
Well, just a week ago, I met with the youth directors of the divisions who were here. And these were all leaders. And I had a 10, 12-minute space to chat with them. And I shared with them the fact that we do this with our young women. But I also said, what are you doing with the young men? And they all agreed that, this is an area that is missing. We have, they get all these badges and get training in different areas, but someone needs to be training them when it comes to their emotions, their decision-making, their treatment of others, especially women. That's not happening, and so I was happy to be able to do that. Once again, I do it every 5 years or so. But I keep hoping and praying that someone's going to pick up the mantle and say, we need to pull our young men aside in Pathfinders and do this with them. And maybe even with the young women, because we don't get all the young women coming to us. you know. And so there are those young women in the church who are not being mentored and trained like we would like to do them. So groups like Pathfinders, even Master Guides, they need to be doing this sometime in all their training and their work. Separate them and say, this is what you need to learn as a young woman, and this is what you need to learn as a young man. I think that is so vitally important, especially through an organized group like Pathfinders and Master Guides, because they've already got the structure. They have the attention of the young people. And so we need to do it, and we need to get it done soon. Because again, the thing that keeps repeating is, and I'm seeing it happening too often, we're either ending up with two things. We're ending up with young women who have strong self-esteem, who are educated, whether it's a degree or just women's leadership, who get into a relationship and the man is nowhere near there, and so she dominates. Or they get into the situation of where she's not attracting any young men because they think, no, she's too independent. And so I have young women in their late 20s and 30s saying, you know, my parents can't get me married, or none of the guys are interested in me because they think I'm just too independent, or the other way around. And I'm saying, no, this now is off balance. Mm-hmm. It's not that we've gone too far. It's just we haven't, the young women are getting this, the young men aren't. And until we could balance that off, where we then help them to create a sense of equality and in the relationship partnership, we're still going to end up with that unequal stuff. And our young women either have to subdue who they are in order to attract young men, and in order to stay married, they press down, subdue their abilities, and play a humble role in the relationship that's not real, because that's not who they are.
And that's not who God made them to be?
No.
Heather Dawn, I hear this from all parts of the world. We have many boys in the church, but very few men. And that's an indictment. That's a serious reading of reality.
It's an indictment to the older men of the church
that have not mentored the younger ones.
That's right.
Because you've got young men, 26, 27 years old, that go back to their parents' basement to play video games instead of, at that point, trying to build a family and establish themselves. And part of it is this I think so silly, this vision of, when I get married, I'm going to be financially independent and I'm going to live in a nice place like my parents did. Mm-hmm. Or my parents do. I'm going to keep that standard of, and the girl that I'm going to get married to, I'm going to give her at least what her parents had. The truth is, if you want to build a family, you should be willing to live in an apartment at the edge of town with cockroaches, being kept at bay.
No water on the third floor of the apartment. I remember that experience. My husband having to go every day and fill buckets of water and bring them up to the third floor. Oh, yes, I remember that. First year of marriage.
You see what I mean?
Yes.
So we have, and that, yes, it put pressure on the relationship and all of this.
Yes.
But it also provided a sense of maturity for the relationship. What would you say to this successful late 20s woman who was successful at school, who thrived at school, who went to university, who has a great job and a thriving career, who no longer had time to foster 10 relationships, out of which one will become
that's right,
the love of her life. Mm-hmm. But she does want a family, because women have the choice. No, I that's not what God is calling me to do, not to have a family and so on. I'm going to focus on my ministry, my career. That's fine. But what would you say to those that do want a family?
Yes.
And now are in this moment in life where that's really difficult because of time and other circumstances. How would you encourage them?
Well, first thing I would say is, number one, if you do get involved, like if you find yourself attracted to a young man and you realize, and he's attracted to you, because that's where it starts, attraction, and you're talking and, getting to know each other, and you realize that there's some deficiencies in this young man. First thing is, ask him, can we get into some counseling? See, and that's one of the things I say to our young women. Don't give up on him because he's deficient in certain areas, you know? And I'm not just talking about educational. When I married my husband, he had just graduated from high school. He was 7 years older than me, but had dropped out of high school. And we met again when I was in college and he was in high school. He was finishing high school on our Adventist campus. But I saw potential in him. And I thought, okay, you know, there's some work that needs to be done. He needs to get education and so forth. And so I got my father involved. And my father was mentoring him. I didn't even know about that. When I say involved, I just introduced him to my dad, brought him home a weekend, introduced him to my dad. My dad picked up on what was going on. He began mentoring him. We need to get into a counseling. And a counseling doesn't even have to be a professional counselor. It's got to be someone who you respect.
A mentor.
That's right. A mentor. And so that's one of the things I say to them.
That's genius, Heather. I had not thought about that. I had not encountered that suggestion or advice. You think someone has the potential.
Yeah.
Make sure that they are willing to invest in themselves and have a mentor.
That's right.
Because if they're not willing to grow, forget it. That's not the right guy.
Exactly.
That's very wise.
Yeah. And too many of our young women look at the external and say, oh no, he's not going to do. Well, how do you know he's not going to do? You know, I mean, my husband now has more master's degrees than I do. You know, it's like, okay. And so you can't give up on what you see on the external level.
So you had to see with God's eyes.
That's right.
Again, the spiritual
That's
right.
There. That's right. There's always potential there, you know, and that person doesn't have to be what you are, in the sense that he doesn't have to be, you got a master's, he doesn't have to have a master's, but he needs to feel secure about himself as a man. And that security is not a worldly thing. It's security in God, that God gives him, that self-worth. I remember years ago when I first came to the GC, maybe after I'd been here about 5 or 6 years, we had lunch with some friends. And these were all Caribbean people. It was a Sabbath lunch. And I heard, you know, how the men separate, the women in the kitchen and the men are out there talking. And I overheard one of the men ask my husband, Joe, now these are all Caribbean men, Joe, what's wrong with you? How could you have your wife flying all over the world and you're the one staying home? That's supposed to be what you're doing, not her. You know, what's up, Joe? You know, because they were thinking, what kind of man are you? And he said, God bless my husband. He said, when you have a racehorse, you don't keep it in the barn. You let it run. And, you know, when we were going home that day in the car, the first thing I said to him, a racehorse?
Did you call me a horse?
Exactly, a racehorse. But then we went on to talk about the value. And I was so appreciative to him because God allowed my husband to see, listen, I have put in this woman some abilities that I need her to use at a certain time in your relationship. And I need you to let her use them. And my husband has never, ever said to me, I don't want you to travel. I think you shouldn't be traveling by yourself. This, that, the other. I go with God and with my husband's blessing because he's secure in our relationship. He's secure in his manhood. And that's the challenge for men when it comes to women in leadership positions. Am I secure in my manhood? Is my ego in check? You know, so many other things. Then get a mentor. Get someone who's going to help you deal with those issues. Don't tell the wife no.
That's a very interesting thought because I had not connected this either. Masculinity for boys, well, masculinity is defined by other men, not by women.
That's right.
Right? So it doesn't matter how many times mommy says that you're a great boy, a great man. No, they want to hear from daddy or from a male figure. This is likely why, as teenage boys, when a teenage boy finally gets to kiss a girl and, you know, all of this, all they want to do is to leave and go back and tell his boys
That's right.
that this happened. Because they need the affirmation of their masculinity by other boys. And when a boy does not have any mentor, does not have anyone that they respect, an other man that they respect, that confirms and affirms their masculinity, they become very insecure. And I find, Heather Dawn, that insecure men are the most dangerous because you never know what they're going to do next. You never know. It's very unpredictable.
And succumbing to abuse is much easier.
Much easier. So secure men that, but it seems to me that the dialogue that your husband, that you just described your husband having with God, seems to be a dialogue of leadership too, because he's listening. Is that God, God's saying to him, I put someone in your life and you need to let her use the gifts that I give her.
Yeah.
You need to encourage her, and you need, create an environment where that may happen.
Yes.
That is, in essence, servant leadership.
It is. That's right. You got it.
Again, the spirituality element is really important here.
Very much. It's a foundation.
I have what I often say now is you need to find a guy that loves God more than you, and you need to find a woman who loves God more than you.
Yeah.
Because at some point in all of our relationships, we're no longer motivated as we were to treat others well, especially if they're very close to us.
Yes.
But God is the King of Kings that reminds all of us that our horizontal relationships are a direct reflection of our vertical one.
Yes.
The way we treat others is how we see our connection with God.
That's why that is so important.
Right. How would you encourage women to keep that first and foremost in their lives, especially as they lead the children and others? Because there is a tension that, no, the husband is the priest of the home and so on and so forth. Personally, I don't see it that way directly. I see that it is also, and sometimes especially, the responsibility of the mom to keep that sense of connection in the home with God. Yeah. Probably because that's what I had in my own home. How do you see that dynamic?
Gosh, you pulled up so many things. I have so many ideas going through my brain. I think the ideal is that the husband is supposed to be the priest of the home. It's not what's real, because in so many homes, it's the woman who calls the children to worship. It's the woman who is able to adapt and adjust what she's doing to the little ones and the various ages. Also, we're not just talking about married families, because we've got all these single parent homes that are normally headed by women, majority.
Yes.
And that's in the church as well. And so we've got to deal with both aspects. So when you think about, well, how are these people going to deal with this? Or how is the woman going to deal with that? That in a sense, she is the spiritual head because of what she's doing and how she wants to see these children being led. And I remember with my son, we had a challenge when he said he didn't want to go to church anymore. And he was about 15, 16 then. And of course, it was devastating to me and my husband. He said, I don't want to go to church. My husband said, well, once you live in this house, you go to church. And that was the end of it. You men talk few words and the kids listen. And so here's my son now, and I'm praying and praying and praying, Lord, you got to save this child. I want him to be in heaven with me. And up comes this young Christian woman who becomes his girlfriend after, this is like 6 months later, and he says, Mom, just wanted to know, I've started back reading my Bible again. And I say, really? What happened? And he says, well, my girlfriend says that she's not dating anybody who's not a Christian. And every night, last thing they did because of course, they're always on their cell phones. She said, no, we've got to read something from the Bible and pray every night. And that brought my son 180 degrees back to a relationship with God. I'm not telling everybody go out there and get a young man or a young woman who's not a Christian, but it's not
a method of evangelism.
It's not. It really isn't. But again, the law of attraction says we're attracted, and then you find out this stuff. Yeah, but we've got to help them realize the importance of that relationship with God. And so in women's ministries, under Nurture, Empower, Outreach, nurture is the area where we look at the spiritual life. And I have to admit, there was a time when we put more emphasis on the spiritual life and less on the other aspects. Now we try to balance it off. Spiritual is always number one, but we also realize that nurture is socially, emotionally, mentally, and so on. And so we've included those aspects in. But that relationship with God. Because I am a firm believer, like so many of us are, everything I do must be fed by this. That relationship with God has to feed what I do in the office, my relationships, the choices I make when I go in a store. It has to all be fed from that. And if it's not, then it's been fed from my own thoughts and whatever temptations and whatever come my way, whatever's happening on the TV, radio, social media, then I'm making a whole bunch of choices I shouldn't make. And I tell women, when you go shopping, put stuff in your cart, walk around in the store a few minutes, because you're going to find yourself moving stuff from your cart, simply because emotions is what guides us first. Oh, I like this dress. I like that shoe. I like this. I like that. Fine. But if you walk around after a while, the Holy Spirit starts saying to you, no, you really don't want that. You know, you don't want that. And women say, yeah, that's the truth. And it's like, yeah, because you've got to give God the space and the time to be heard, not rush in, rush out, to be heard in our daily experience, not just our morning worship or evening worship, but as I go through the day, I've got to slow down and let God guide me. You know, just stop and take a breath. Is this a good email that I should send? Let me just save it as a draft for now. And, you know, let the Lord marinate in my mind what I should do with it. And sometimes I don't send it. Sometimes I rewrite it because it's not what He wants. And so we try to teach our young women the same thing. It's not just the morning worship and the evening worship and the midday worship, major. But as you go through the rush of the day, you've got to have periods when you pause and wait for God to talk, wait for God to direct. If not, it's just bookends. And then the rest of the day, it's my day.
So the stronger your connection with God, the less likely you are to be manipulated by marketing and your own emotions and your own preconceptions.
Definitely.
So there is an element of freedom there in one's connection with God. Fantastic. Heather Dawn, our time is coming up. What would you say now? You talk to the men. Now I would like you to talk to the women. So a lot of our listeners are from 30 years old and older. What would you say to the women that are now, you know, at that phase in life? They're no longer just looking at, you know, their immediate what to do. Now they've somewhat established.
Yes.
What would you say to them? And then if you could pray for all of us, please.
Sure. Number one, your relationship with God. That's number one. That's what is a guiding factor in the choices you make, whether in the supermarket or with a boyfriend, a future husband. Let God guide all your choices. Lord, should I park here or park there? Let God guide. Number two, have a group of women who you pray with.
You mentioned that before.
Yes. Have spiritual support. The relationship with God is important, but that spiritual support helps to buffer. It's that place where you could go and share stuff and say, I've got this problem, pray for me. Or I've met this guy, pray for me. I don't know what else I need to know, help me. And that sort of thing. So relationship with God, that spiritual support, which is more than spiritual because you also talk of stuff, you go out to eat and so on. And then the third thing I would say that is so vitally important is have a mentor. Have an older woman who is mentoring you. Ask God to show you a woman who you can learn from. I am 60 plus and I still have a mentor and I'm mentoring. And I've done that for many years. Always have a mentor and always be mentoring. And I think that's a rule that women need to have. And we teach them that. Always have that. And I think when you do that, it's not a perfect picture, but you've got more tools at your disposal than you ever would have had if you're just going through life.
How do you find a mentor? Do you just turn up to somebody you admire and ask?
You know, when I got into this thing of I need to have a mentor, it came with a lot of prayer because I wasn't sure. I identified some women older than me who I thought would be good, but I wasn't sure because I didn't know them that well. And I prayed about it. And I said, Lord, which one should I choose? And the Lord worked it out in an interesting way. I was in the supermarket one day and there came this woman, one of them. And we started chatting. And in the little small, we stood up chatting for almost 15 minutes. But in that little conversation, I was like, this is the one.
This is it.
Yeah, this is it.
That's amazing.
And I had never met any of these other women in the supermarket before. It was always either church or office. And then bang, here it is, I meet her in a in a very neutral environment. And we get talking about stuff. And wow, okay, Lord, that's it. So
and then what happened? Did you ask her what, or does she know she's your mentor?
Oh, I asked her.
You asked her?
Oh, definitely. I asked. If I want a mentor, I better ask. I'm not. Sometimes God will send someone, but I really believe in being proactive and in praying and then doing something. And so I asked her, and she said yes. And so she lives farther from me now than she was before because they've moved, but we're still in touch. And I still take, different situations to her. And I thank God for her life. And
Praise the Lord.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Fantastic. Heather, don't pray for not just the women, but the men also.
Oh, definitely. Won't leave them out. Father, thank you. Thank you that we could have this discussion today and talk about issues that women and men also are wondering about and asking themselves, what is the church doing? And the world isn't serving these needs. So how do we get these things dealt with? So I'm really thankful for the discussion that we've had. I also want to thank you that you have people in place in different areas of the world, of the church, who are dealing with these issues. I pray for the women, Lord, for our young women. We deal with 13 years and up and sometimes 11 years and up. I thank you for the work that's been done with them. But Father, so much more work needs to be done. There's so many young women out there who are still living their lives as the rest of young women in the world are living their lives. Extend our influence, draw them into us, Lord. And the older women, help them to know that even if they've been in a relationship for many, many years and there's no joy, there's no growth, there's nothing, that you can help them fill that need. Even if their spouse isn't doing it and may never do it, but you can help with their relationship with you, but also as they meet with other women who can nurture them. How important that is, Father. And for our men, open their eyes, Lord. Open their eyes to see the younger men among them, not to criticize them and knock them down and by their words and statements, but to realize these young men need our help. We've got the experience. We've learned through the difficult trials. Now we need to help these young men be better men than we were. Help our men in the church to see that, Lord, and to step up and do what needs to be done so that when these young men get older and they're looking for wives, Ellen White gives us good descriptions in the book Messages to Young People that she wrote, the questions we need to ask of our future wife and future man, future husband, that they look at these things and realize the value in thinking deeply about these things. But Lord, someone has to guide them. So I pray that you will continue to work in the minds of the men and the women in the church and help us to keep reaching out, to be mentored and to mentor, because that's the only way that a lot of change is going to take place. I thank you for hearing our prayer. I thank you for the work that's been done through this podcast, wonderful podcast. And I just pray that you will continue to put the information out there and connect it to the people who need to hear, whether in the church or out the church. Connect it to them, Lord, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Heather Dawn, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for listening to this episode of A&N In Depth. If you enjoyed what you heard and you want to stay up to date with the latest episodes, make sure you hit the subscribe button wherever it is that you're listening to this. Don't forget to tune in next week for more engaging conversations that will challenge us to grow and learn together. I'll see you next week.